China unleashes a three-layer counterstrike to break U.S. tariff trap. When Washington launched a new round of tariffs targeting Chinese goods in April 2025, specifically electric vehicles, EVs, clean energy batteries, and high-tech chips, the world didn't just witness a trade action, but a strategic signal. Tariffs on Chinese EVs were raised to 100%. Lithium batteries, solar energy equipment, and semiconductor components from China now face duties 4 to 5 times higher than last year. This blow, as analysts describe, is a stress test for the entire structure of China's high-tech export ecosystem. But the surprise didn't come from the US. It came from Beijing's response. Instead of threatening retaliatory tariffs or issuing fiery state media statements, China executed a series of quiet yet strategic measures, from activating trillion yuan public investment packages to restructuring its global production and logistics networks. If in 2018 China was caught off guard by the Trump administration's tariff wave, by 2025, they entered round 2 with an entirely different posture. No longer drawn into a tit-for-tat game, Beijing is countering by redesigning its industrial development ecosystem. So what has China done? What is it doing? And what will it do to neutralize Washington's tariffs without firing a single shot? Join Top 10 Discoveries official as we dive deep into the covert strategies reshaping the global trade power map. In April 2025, the Biden administration formally announced a new set of tariff hikes targeting strategic Chinese goods, from EVs and lithium-ion batteries to solar components and semiconductor chips. With tariffs reaching up to 100% enacted under Section 301, these measures are not just commercial, but mark a turning point in U.S. industrial and tech competition policy in the post-globalization era. Detailed list of goods and tariff rates. Per the U.S. Trade Representative, USTR, specific tariffs include Chinese electric vehicles, EVs, 100% tariff, effective September 2024, lithium-ion batteries for EVs, 25% tariff, effective September 2024. Lithium-ion batteries for non-EV uses, 25% tariff, effective January 2025 2026. Solar photovoltaic cells, 50% tariff, aimed at blocking cheap Chinese products from flooding the U.S. market. Battery components and auxiliary modules, 25% tariff, covering energy storage systems, ESS, and solid-state batteries. According to Bloomberg, China's EV and clean energy equipment exports reached over $150 billion in 2023. The U.S., once a major importer, has shifted to erecting trade barriers, causing a sharp drop in direct imports from China in 2024, particularly in solar batteries. Per Solar Power World, only 490 kilowatts of solar cells were directly imported from China in 2024, virtually zero. Which industries were hit first? First, the EV sector. With a 100% tariff, Chinese EVs are effectively priced out of the U.S. market. This specifically targets brands like BYD, NIO, and XPENG, which have expanded into Europe and eyed North America. Notably, China accounts for nearly 70% of global EV production per the World Economic Forum. This is a strategic defensive move by the U.S. to block at the gate a wave of affordable EVs before it surges domestically. Next, the lithium battery and clean energy component supply chain. China controls over 70% of global lithium-ion battery production capacity, 60% of graphite, and is the leading exporter of solar modules. The 25 to 50% tariffs directly strike the scale and price advantages of giants like KATL, EVE Energy, and contemporary Amperex. The U.S. also imposed tariffs on non-EV components, signaling this isn't limited to EVs. It's a systemic strike on the entire clean energy supply chain. Finally, strategic raw materials and semiconductors. Reports indicate tariffs also apply to graphite, tungsten, and certain machine tools used in battery production. This builds on 2022 to 2023 export controls on AI chips and lithography equipment to China. Thus, the U.S. isn't just keeping Chinese goods out, but cutting off development paths at the value chain start, from raw materials to production equipment. What is the U.S. aiming for? 6 key objectives behind this heavy blow. 1. Prevent China from dominating global supply chains. The Biden administration recognizes that without strong action, China could set the global standard in clean energy. Beijing's superior cost efficiency and scale put all competitors at a disadvantage. Tariffs are a tool to buy time for the U.S. to reinvest and restructure domestic industrial capacity. 2. Protect U.S. manufacturing. Domestic giants like Tesla, Ford EV, and battery makers like QuantumScape or GM Ultium face intense pressure from Chinese pricing. The 100% tariff acts as a shield to help them survive and expand investments, paired with Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, incentives to pull supply chains back to the U.S. or allied nations. 3. Reduce strategic dependency. With China supplying over 80% of the world's refined graphite and serving as a critical hub for electrode materials and PV cells, the U.S. seeks selective decoupling. This is driven not just by economics, but by supply chain security in crises, from pandemics to conflicts. 4. Compete for clean energy tech leadership. This is no longer just trade. It's about seizing the world's rooftop in foundational technology. Per the Atlantic Council, the new policy aims to keep the U.S. from falling behind in the green transition. 5. Re-establish negotiation leverage. These tariffs are seen as a strategic bargaining chip for future talks with China, especially on supply chains and bilateral trade. 6. Respond to domestic political pressure. The move is also driven by the 2024 to 2025 U.S. election context, with both parties aiming to project a tough stance on China to win over workers and tech voters in key states. In sum, the new tariff round isn't just a short-term trade response, but a long-term recalibration of U.S. industrial and tech competition strategy. The target isn't just Chinese EVs, it's Beijing's entire ecosystem of next-generation energy and materials, where it holds a leading role. While Washington opts for an aggressive tariff assault on core industries like EVs and clean energy, Beijing pursues a deeply calculated strategy, easing internal pressure, selective counterstrikes, and expanding strategic boundaries through a global partner network. Each move is low-key, but designed to minimize losses while sustaining China's tech and export rise. First, internal reform, shifting to growth and self-reliance. Immediately after the U.S. tariff wave, China ramped up investments in domestic consumption and production to replace exports. In 2024, household consumption in coastal provinces like Guangdong and Jiangsu rose 9.1% and 8.7% respectively, the highest in 5 years per China's Ministry of Commerce. The government also launched new preferential credit packages for renewable energy firms selling domestically. A 2025 CGTN report notes that major solar battery makers like LONGi and TRINA shifted from full export to 50% domestic consumption within 12 months. Simultaneously, to bolster supply chain resilience, China accelerated localization of AI chips, energy materials, and battery production equipment, a strategic move increasingly bypassing U.S. export bans. Second, selective counterstrikes with symmetric tariffs. Contrary to U.S. expectations of a broad retaliatory shock, China targeted America's weakest export links: agricultural products and natural gas. On May 5, 2025, Beijing imposed additional tariffs on U.S. beef, soybeans, and liquefied natural gas, LNG, with duties up to 125% per Nguyen Cu Quoc Te NCQT. U.S. Department of Commerce data shows soybean exports to China fell 38% in Q1 2025 compared to Q1 2024, the steepest drop in a decade. Some U.S. energy firms like Cheniere and Freeport LNG reported a sudden decline in Chinese orders since March. This counterstrike not only pressures politically sensitive U.S. agricultural states, key election battlegrounds, but signals Beijing can inflict targeted pain. Next, expanding the shock absorber belt by accelerating exports via partners. Rather than standing still against U.S. tariffs, China restructured its trade network by boosting transshipment exports through Southeast Asia. Per CGTN, in Q1 2025 alone, Chinese EV exports to Vietnam surged 112%, while solar module exports to Malaysia jumped 87%. PV Tech data shows many Chinese firms, including BYD, CATL, and Jinko Solar, are expanding factories in ASEAN, using these locations to bend trade routes and evade tariffs. For instance, BYD completed Phase 1 of an EV assembly plant in Thailand in early 2025, with a 150,000 vehicle annual capacity. This allows the firm to export to the US as third country products, legally compliant with international trade rules. Finally, reinforcing global dominance via BRI and supply chain diplomacy. China isn't just adapting, it's advancing. In April 2025, President Xi Jinping visited Vietnam, Cambodia, and Malaysia, key links in China's expanded Southeast Asian supply chain. Beyond traditional cooperation, China signed numerous agreements on logistics, battery technology, and data, quietly laying the groundwork for a tariff-resistant supply chain. Concurrently, the Digital Silk Road 2.0 was activated in Pakistan, UAE, and Kenya, with a $9.8 billion tech investment package to build data infrastructure for made with China, but not from China, production and exports. China's counter-strategy lacks fanfare, but is highly calculated, protecting domestic markets, minimizing global risks, and turning challenges into opportunities to reshape world trade structures. While the US targets the present, Beijing is investing in the future. Contrary to initial predictions of disarray, China isn't just holding firm, but demonstrating resilience amid trade tensions. From rerouting supply chains and boosting domestic demand to trillion-dollar industrial leverage, all are taking effect, proving the three-layer buffer strategy is not just defensive theory, but a functioning response system in action. 1. Sustained export growth. Despite tariff barriers, China maintains export momentum in heavily targeted sectors. Per Bloomberg 2024, China's battery and EV exports hit over $150 billion, and by Q1 2025, its global EV market share still exceeded 60%. Products not entering the US directly are rerouted through ASEAN, the Middle East, or Africa, where China is strengthening trade agreements and infrastructure investments, particularly via the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. 2. Supply chains transforming, not collapsing. A clear effect of the third buffer layer is the supply chain shift. Per Mercom India and PV Tech, in 2024 to 2025, US solar battery imports from China plummeted, but surged from Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia, where Chinese-owned or controlled factories operate. This shows China isn't abandoning the US market, but redirecting supply chains for greater flexibility. Third, hidden leverage. $2 trillion domestic industrial strategy. Instead of matching tariffs, Beijing opted for a quieter, deeper strategy. Massive investment in replacing imported technology. Per Xinhua 2025, China is rolling out a $2 trillion tech localization plan by 2027, spanning semiconductors, chips, aiming to fully replace US and European chips in critical sectors like AI, telecom, and defense. AI and operating systems, deploying native AI platforms like Qwen 2.5 and DeepSeek, while pushing domestic OS on over 80% of government PCs from 2025. Industrial equipment. From machine tools and CNC systems to medical devices, state-owned firms are tasked with cutting critical component imports by 90% within 5 years. Rather than racing US tariffs, China is leaping ahead through industrial self-reliance, a step toward true tech sovereignty. 4. Signs of successful self-reliance. Domestic chip usage in Chinese AI firms rose from 23% 2023 to 47% 2025. Per Semiconductor Industry News. Over 130,000 SMEs receive financial aid or tax breaks from tech self-reliance packages, totaling over 1.4 trillion CNY in 2024 alone. From 2024, over 75% of AI computing servers for government agencies use China-made hardware-software platforms, per CGTN and Caixin. The three-layer buffer, doesn't yield flashy short-term growth, but shines in long-term resilience. China isn't just reacting to trade shocks, it's using them as leverage to restructure its economy. While the US focuses on containment, China opts for accelerating self-reliance and global expansion. The tariff war is thus becoming a test of developmental grit and long-term vision. Amid escalating US-China trade tensions, the confrontation isn't just about tariff rates or trade flows, but a clash of ideologies, a showdown between two development models, control and self-reliance, China, versus open but cautious markets, US. In the US, wariness of Chinese technology has led to export controls, investment restrictions, and now unprecedented tariffs on EVs, batteries, and solar panels from China. Washington continues its supply chain localization policy, heavily investing in manufacturing support programs like the CHIPS Act and IRA. However, notably, the US strategy emphasizes barriers and containment over high-speed growth. As Washington tightens AI scrutiny, bans tech sales to China, or demands data transparency, some experts worry the safety-first policy may hamstring the US, especially in fast-innovating fields like AI, energy, and automation. Conversely, China avoids symmetric retaliation like tariffs or bans, focusing on depth, accelerating localization, expanding global markets, and closing tech gaps. The three-layer buffer strategy exemplifies this, not confronting head-on but building a long-term stance. The crux lies in committing over $2 trillion to industrial self-reliance by 2027, an unprecedented sum spanning chips, AI, operating systems, and heavy industries. Rather than waiting for US easing, Beijing is racing ahead with internal strengths. What's unfolding isn't just a tech race, but a test of two 21st-century development paths. As China pursues self-reliance, technologization, and globalization, and the US tightens protectionism, observers ask, who's shaping the future, the controller or the barrier breaker? The game is no longer just tariff versus tariff. It's about model choices, faith in state versus market, and long-term vision versus short-term priorities. On the surface, this may seem like a tariff war, with figures like 100%, 125%, or $2 trillion flashing as arrows aimed at each other. But peeling back China's three-layer buffer and contrasting it with US containment reveals a world entering a phase of redefining global economic power. The US builds walls, China builds capacity, one defends, the other advances. In this game, China isn't just navigating tariff barriers, it's redesigning its industrial ecosystem. And as the world shifts toward clean energy, high tech, and AI, this strategy isn't mere coping, it's vision. So the question isn't how will China respond, but how will the world adapt to a new China, more self-reliant, sophisticated, and increasingly independent? What do you think of China's three-layer strategy? Is it a shrewd or risky move? Share your views below. And to keep up with deep analyses on geopolitics, tech, and global super strategies, don't forget to subscribe to Top 10 Discoveries Official now. Top 10 Discoveries Official will return with more astonishing discoveries, monumental projects, and untold stories from around the world. Goodbye and see you again.